That every time I do this, I always like to think I'm talking to the orchestra. And tonight especially, I feel like I'm talking to the orchestra and the chorus. There was one time when I did a very large piece for chorus back in Venezuela, and I actually had to use a megaphone, which for a conductor was very uncomfortable. But it's so good to see all of you. We have an incredible program that I think it's incredibly appropriate to finish this incredible season with. We're going to finish this season with a bang, and this has been one of the most rewarding years of music personally for me because of the breadth of music and the breadth of musical experiences that we've had throughout the year. And I do hope that you have enjoyed a lot of these craziness that we've thrown at you at times, because that I think is what makes us want to attend more performances. I don't know about you, but I'm always looking for surprises. I'm always looking to be exposed to something new and exposed to stuff that maybe, you know what, I might have thought differently about, whether it's composers, whether it's styles. And pushing the envelope, I think, is one of the things that we should do as musicians and we should do as an institution. And I love to get messages from people telling me that their whole conception of what symphonic music and what an orchestra is completely different now that they've been attending our performances regularly. And I like to hear that. I would hate for people to come here kind of like on an automatic pilot, oh, there's a concert, I should just go. Instead of like, you know, I really want to go see this, and if I don't go and hear it, I'm going to miss it. So to finish this season with the program that we have tonight, I think is indicative of the type of music that we have been championing all of this year and that you will continue seeing in the upcoming seasons. First thing, a warning. All of the music in tonight's program is from the 20th and 21st century. Anywhere else, that might create people running for the exit. Not in Nashville. We have, I think, one of the great unsung gems of British music, the Serenade to Music by Ralph Vaughan Williams, which, because it is a short choral piece, it is hard to program. Normally when you program choral music, it's the big, you know, large, one whole entire evening type performances. But because we have room on the first half, I felt this was a perfect time for me to champion a piece that is very dear to my heart. Plus the subject matter is about how music should be in people's life. This piece in particularly is a salute to music. Ralph Vaughan Williams wrote this piece in 1938, and the whole purpose of this composition was actually to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the conducting career of Sir Henry Wood. Sir Henry Wood was one of the most important British conductors of the early part of the 20th century. His claim to fame is that he founded the Promenade Concerts in London, better known by their nickname, the Proms, which are a huge musical festival during the summer. It's basically an entire month of non-stop concerts. And every major symphonic orchestra, every major soloist, every major performer has to be a part of this huge festival. If you've ever attended a Proms concert, for anybody who loves classical music, this is something that you have to experience at some point in your life, because these are really almost rock concerts. The whole Royal Albert Hall is filled to capacity, and on the main floor you have people just standing up, usually young kids, and they're standing there. I've seen performances of like Rite of Spring, and they're all like they're in a rock concert. They're unbelievable, and they become not only great performances, but they've also become cultural events unto themselves. Sir Henry Wood started these actually during World War I, and they have continued basically uninterrupted. And Vaughan Williams was a good friend of Sir Henry Wood, and he wanted to pay tribute to his friend. So he wrote the piece that you're going to hear opening the concert tonight, which is entitled Serenade to Music. The text is by Shakespeare. So right there, you know, Vaughan Williams music, Shakespeare's text, you can't go wrong. Something that is unique about this piece in particular is that the original version was actually not written for chorus. Vaughan Williams actually wrote this for 16 singers, 4 sopranos, 4 mezzos, 4 tenors, 2 baritones, 2 basses. Even more so, every single singer was handpicked for the premiere. And each of these singers had a personal connection to Sir Henry Wood. This was another layer to pay homage to this man that Vaughan Williams admired very much. By the way, Sir Henry Wood died in 1944. So this is basically towards the end of his career. Again, this is 50 years of a conducting career for this man. Vaughan Williams even went further in the composition of this. If you look at the score of this music, by the entrance of every single text in the music, every time a voice comes in, he would add initials, basically saying who should be singing at specific time. And each of these texts basically were also intended to represent and bring out some of the personalities of these singers. So one of the major problems about this piece to begin with is balance. The orchestra is large. It's a British Vaughan Williams size orchestra, tuba, large brass, full strings, 16 singers. It's an uphill battle. The only way that this piece can truly work with that setup is really in recording. I've heard it done once. They tried to do it and they had all the singers up front, and even with Wagner style, you know, very large singers, it was very tricky. The orchestra had to work extremely hard to play so soft, and even then it was very tricky. So nowadays, the piece is mostly done in the setting that you're going to hear tonight, which is with full chorus. Vaughan Williams himself, after the premiere, came to realize that, you know what, that was a great idea, it was a beautiful homage, but you know what, let's be real. So he basically rewrote everything so it would be played by a full chorus. Still though, the initials are in the score. And for me, I even went further, because when I found every single one of these singers, I went, of course, thank you, Wikipedia, and I researched a little bit about each of these singers. And it's really funny and interesting for me to see how, based on what I learned about each individual singers and how the text that they were assigned, I can see the connections. There are some moments of maturity in the music that were given to some of the older persons in this, I guess you would call it dream team of singers. There were some of the other sections that have to do with innocence in the text that were given to some of the younger girls in this small group. So in the end, it's a very interesting piece of music. More importantly, as I said before, the text comes from the last act of Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. And in it, this is right after Lorenzo and Jessica have eloped. You have to go back maybe to your high school years. Some of you who read Merchant of Venice. How many of you know Merchant of Venice? If you don't, please. I mean, I found it. I'm sorry, I had to read the Spanish version. I apologize. But still, I still had the English version, but I'm sorry. It's, being English as a second language and Shakespeare is not easy. So I had to help myself with a very good Spanish translation. But in this scene in particular, this fifth act, Lorenzo and Jessica are at Belmont, which is an idyllic place. From everything that I read in the story, this is really the escape place for people to kind of hang out, and it's a beautiful evening. And Jessica and Lorenzo are basically having this very intimate moment, and Lorenzo looks up at the sky and starts saying that they are surrounded by this sweet harmony, that he sees the sky and the planets and the stars and the moon and all of these celestial bodies, very much like the music of the spheres, create this wonderful musical element that they are surrounded by. And this sweet harmony, as it call it, is just overwhelming and at a perfect moment for them to share their love. And as they start this discussion, they start talking about how music is important, how music is truly important for one's soul. In one of my favorite lines in this music, they say, a man that has no music in him should not be trusted. As a conductor, I gotta love that. And tonight you're in for a special treat, and you do know that part of performances is also the extra added bonus that you need to follow along. So we will have the super titles. So you will be able to follow along, hum along if you want as well. But I do think that the visual part of reading a text, and we've been successful at this in the past few years, I do think has an even more powerful message when not only you hear it, but you see it as well. So tonight, as you see this, I think you're going to be totally engrossed by this beautiful music, and more important, by a message that is very simple, but yet for those of you who are regular concert goers, this will be speaking directly to you. And hopefully this will reaffirm to you how music hopefully plays an important part in your life and hopefully makes your lives better. That's what the symphony should be doing. The whole reason for me to having a world-class symphony orchestra is literally to make this place a better place to live. To make a place that we call Music City really worthy of not only an incredible great concert hall, but an incredible world-class orchestra. So there's a reason why this piece is closing this program. It's closing the season, basically, opening this last concert of the subscription series. Because the message to me is very important. The music is very operatic at times. You will hear the connection between the text and how the music becomes idyllic. Sometimes it becomes dark, sometimes it becomes melancholy. Vaughan Williams is amazing in how he sets the mood, I think, of the story. And like I said, for those of you who are familiar with Merchant of Venice, trust me, you're going to enjoy every single second of this. The second piece on the program is by the American composer Lowell Lieberman, who is actually in his early 50s. He's 52 years old. He's from New York, and this is actually his third symphony. Something you should know about Lowell Lieberman is that he's been referred to as part of a new group of composers called the New Tonalists. Somebody that has spent basically his entire career writing music that is very pleasing to the ears, with melodies and beautiful harmonies and beautiful orchestrations. Why do I make that caveat? Because you do know that in the 20th century, some of those things that we used to be taken for granted, like melodies and harmonies, kind of went out the window. Can you blame audiences sometimes when they said 20th century music? They freak out. I don't blame them, because for a while, and I agree with this, composers and artists sometimes, I think, push things a bit too far. I am all for experimentation, but in the end, music has to have something to hang on to. The music of Ligeti, as atonal as it is, to me is fantastic because it sends a message the same way Steve Reich's music does. The same way that Bartók's music, when he wrote it, which was considered too avant-garde, Schoenberg. My problem is that there were too many composers that tried to copy that, and they were not quite as successful. To me, I always prefer the original. I like Ligeti. I don't like the people that try to imitate Ligeti. I always use the example of John Cage, 4 minutes and 33 seconds, which is a piece literally of silence. It's 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence. What a concept! Of course, when the next guy wrote 6 minutes and 20 seconds. So going back to what I said about Lieberman, Lowell Lieberman's music is very approachable. I have known about this composer for a long time. I have become familiar with his flute concerto, with his piccolo concerto. His second symphony has been recorded. It's a wonderful piece. I like to think of him as almost a modern composer in the mold of Richard Strauss. Very large, broad, big melodies, and not only that, very lush orchestrations. This symphony was written in 2010, and there is a connection to Nashville. First thing you should know is that this piece is actually a co-commission of which the Nashville Symphony is a part of, by a group of orchestras that is called the Magnus Opus Commissioning Project. And this commissioning project came together and is the brainchild of a lady out in San Francisco called, her name is Catherine Gould. And Ms. Gould is a very successful banker, investment person, and her passion is new music. She has basically made this Magnus Opus project her brainchild, where every 2 or 3 years she gathers orchestras and conductors and gathers 5 or 6 composers and commissions them to write different pieces in different genres, symphonies, concertos, overtures. And the idea behind it, which is actually quite smart, is to attach each of these pieces to a particular orchestra and a conductor. This is actually the 4th piece since I've become music director of this Magnus Opus Commission that we've been a part of. We did a piece by Miguel del Águila a few years ago called The Fall of Cusco. Some of you might remember this. We also did a piece with Stephen Nisserlis, the cellist, when he was here, called Populi Meus by Sir John Taverner, when we were actually displaced because of the flood. And then this now, the Lowell Lieberman Symphony No. 3, which was premiered by the Virginia Symphony. The whole idea of having these many orchestras involved in the project is that the piece gets played more than once. One of the trickier things about commissioning a new work is that when one orchestra gets involved, the orchestra plays it, and then it kind of disappears. You know, it's hard to get it to have a life. And God forbid, I remember one time in Eugene, when I was music director there, before my time, the previous music director had commissioned a piece and the composer called it Eugene Overture. I mean, outside of Eugene, it's not going to get a life. You know, and I think of that almost as a waste of energy and a waste of resources. I want a piece to have a life. The same way that Beethoven symphonies, when they were played, for them to be a part of the repertoire, they need to be played. And I believe that if a piece is played 6, 7 times in different venues, in different places, in different countries, hopefully, by different orchestras, if the piece is good, it'll stay around. One listening is not enough. One performance is not enough. I've always believed that music is a living organism. And it has to breathe. It has to develop itself. It has to put itself in front of different audiences. The audience in Nashville is not the same audience as it is in New York. The audience tonight is not the same audience as tomorrow night. They're all different, and you never know how people are going to react different. Now, going back to why this piece is connected to Nashville. The piece was written in 2010. It was premiered in May of 2010 by the Virginia Symphony. And Mr. Lieberman has spoken very clearly that there were 2 events that year that were emotionally connected to this composition. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf that summer, and the Nashville flood. Those were 2 things that he was almost very much in tune every day for the entire, not only from May on, we remember those days, but through the entire summer. And one thing that he talks about in the program notes is that every day when he turned on the TV, it was always an expectation of like, what's going to happen today? Were they able to cap that? Were they able to, was the situation in Nashville improving? It's like every day there was an adventure, and that created a very deep sense of almost emotional instability for Mr. Lieberman as he wrote the piece. This piece is 1 movement altogether. The symphony has, I would say, 4 movements, very much like a symphony, but unlike a Beethoven or Haydn symphony, it is continuous. It is incredibly expressive, this music. From the moment, first time I heard it, it captivates you because it is simple in its melodic writing, but yet it has different moods. Literally, like, again, you can almost see Mr. Lieberman turning on the TV or turning on his radio and waiting to hear, hopefully, good news. In many cases, of course, it was bad news. And one particular moment in the second movement, I would call it, he actually pays a salute to the Gulf section of Louisiana. There's a Cajun music section in this music, which is very short, very brief, but I can almost see why he was thinking of this. There's another section which is very fast, has almost a dance-like feel to it. And Lowell told me that he actually thought of calling the symphony Dance Symphony. But then he changed his mind because he didn't want to give it the wrong idea that this is a symphony about dances. It is not. Although some of the movements have that, you're going to be tapping your foot through some of these sections. The piece itself, like I said, is continuous. The orchestrations can be very lush. Sometimes they can be very transparent. It is very virtuosic in the writing, which I think for an orchestra like ours, I've always said it's a piece of cake. But there's a few moments in the music that we've actually been sweating a little bit, which is good. We like a challenge. And something else you should know about Mr. Lieberman is that when he was writing this music, he was surprised about how fast he wrote it. He basically wrote it almost in a 2-month period, you know. And he said he's never written anything so fast. First of all, he said that he was reaching the deadline, which for composers is deadly, you know. And they have to turn in the piece by a certain date, and that was kind of, you know, getting the best of him. But Mr. Lieberman also told me that because these events, he's kind of a news junkie. He was glued to the TV the whole time. He had a lot of information in him to get the music out. I think you're going to enjoy this piece, and I personally got to tell you, this is a piece that I know I will be taking out for a spin because I've enjoyed learning it, and I know that this is a piece that will have a life beyond the original orchestras that were involved in the project, in the process, and I know we have a winner, and I think you will enjoy this piece of music. The second half, one of the great one-hit wonders in classical music. Carmina Burana. I know, there's some Orr fans here that are going to tell me about Catulli Carmina and the Triumph of Aphrodite. Fine. But I'm sorry, they don't even come close to the popularity of Carmina Burana. Carl Orr, really, I mean, I'm sorry, he is a one-hit wonder. If VH1 ever did a thing about classical musicians, he would be the first guy. He would be right next to Milli Vanilli and the guys from La Macarena. Something unique about the Carmina Burana and the Serenade to Music, they're only 1 year apart. Carmina Burana was premiered in 1937 in Frankfurt. As I said before, Vaughan Williams was premiered in 1938 in London. But yet, they seem centuries apart in their style. That kind of shows you how 20th century was really going in all different directions, depending really almost in what street you were living on. Through the 19th century in Central Europe, music had a language. You know, it could be different between Brahms and Wagner and Mahler, but the idea was kind of similar. But to get to 1938, 37, and to hear these disparate, you know, Vaughan Williams on this corner and then Carl Orff in this one, again, it's almost like they come from different planets. Carl Orff cannot be discussed without mentioning, unfortunately, his ties to Nazi Germany, which his entire life after the war, he did everything in his power to hide. He did everything in his power to somehow keep that away, even so much so that both his biographers, both of them, conspired in both biographies while he was alive that there's no mention whatsoever of those years. And I mention this because it is as an artist, obviously you admire their musical artistic output, but these things have to also be put into context of who they were while they were alive and what type of persons they were. I mention this also because in many letters during the war, Carl Orff very proudly, you know, would sign Heil Hitler at the end of his letters. So we have, these things have to be mentioned. As much as we admire the man, there are parts of his life that are very dark and are really up for questioning. And I think that's one of the reasons why, besides the Carmina being so popular, it's one of the reasons why the other music really never caught on. There was kind of a stain on his record, which also tells you how good Carmina Burana really is to survive beyond that. That to me is the greatest testament of what a great piece of music, regardless of who writes it, in this day and age, it still has appeal. I cannot think of another 20th century piece that is a sure box office hit. There is no other. Beethoven 9, yeah, 19th century. But 20th century music, Carmina Burana, all 3 nights are sold out. It's a sure thing for orchestras. The reason is because it's about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It is. I'm not going to kid you. The text will be right there. At times, it will get dirty. I apologize ahead of time if some of you might be offended by it. I'm sorry. We try to sugarcoat it, some of it, but the subject matter can at times be a little bit thank you. I like that word, racy. What's even more fun, and what makes it even more impressive, all of these texts were written in the 12th century. Some things never change. The things that make us blush now made them blush back then. And you know what's even more fun? These were written in secret by monks. Quietly, under the candlelight, when everybody went to bed after their prayers. Many monks would sit down and really share their innermost desires. And isn't it more fun when it's kind of like hidden? Oh, come on, you know it's true. Danger is a fun thing. Carmina Burana literally means songs from Bayern, which Bayern really being a German version of Bayern, which is Bavaria. These are songs from Bavaria, more particularly from Benedict Bayern, Benediktborn is actually a village about 30 miles south of Munich, which is as old as time itself. There is a monastery there called the Benedict Monasterium, which is still there, founded in 733. And as I said, these texts are from the 12th, 13th century. They're mostly in Latin. Some of them are in High German. A couple are in Greek. Some even go as far as being in French.
Well, that's really
well, that language can be very special. It's not the same doing it in French as it is doing it in Latin. Sorry, in French is much better. In 1803, Napoleon made an agreement with Maximilian VI, the Elector of Bavaria, in 1803, where basically they secularized all of the monasteries. By the way, I hope you're writing this down. There will be a test at the end. 1803, all of the monasteries were secularized, which basically meant that all of their libraries, their entire libraries at the monastery, were actually moved to the public libraries downtown. These were when Napoleon, during the Napoleonic Wars. And it was there that a mind by the name of Johann Andreas Schmeller in 1846 came across these parchments by accident. He was actually cataloging stuff at the Munich Museum, and he found these very, very old parchments, again written in Greek and in Latin and in German. And he was fascinated because they were very simple stories, simple poems that dealt with everyday stuff. Springtime, love, dirty love, innocent love, Cupid, bar games, drinking games, anything that you would expect in a monastery to take place. And of course he was fascinated by the fact that all of these things were written by monks, you know, and of course they were written in secret. So he made a collection of all of these poems and published them in 1843, and they became incredibly popular. There was even somebody else that picked them up and called it Wine, Women, and Song. There's a book called that, which are direct quotations from this collection of poems. And it is not really until the 1920s, 30s actually, when Carl Orff is looking for a libretto for an opera that he's been commissioned. He was commissioned by the Frankfurt Opera to write a story, and he found these stories and immediately said, of course, this has opera written all over it. It's a very simple subject matter that anybody can understand, you know, and which is, I mean, with opera, it's easy. That's why opera is so popular. I mean, he loves her, she loves him, the mother doesn't like it, somebody dies. We all are going to relate to that. Some more tragic than others. So when the premiere took place with this, which is not really an opera, it's not really a ballet, even though sometimes ballets put it together. It's not really an oratorio. It is just an orchestra with a full chorus. It has a soprano soloist. It has a tenor, sometimes sung by a countertenor because it's too high. It has a baritone solo. It has a children's chorus. And they tell stories. The piece is divided into three parts. In the springtime, with the very famous opening of O Fortuna, O Fortune, the whole idea of how we're basically prisoners of our own fate, that we do not know what we have in store, that fortune sometimes can be kind, many times it can be quite cruel. Then you get to the actual spring section where flowers start blooming. It was like that back in the 12th century. God knows it's like that now. And everything that represents. Love is in the air. All of the relationship with agriculture. How life basically changes after winter. And everything comes back to life. The texts are very, very simple. There's a beautiful dance in the first part. Beautiful celebratory outdoor folk dance that gets you in the spirit. And by the end of the first part, if the world were mine, you know, if I had control over everything, what would I do? We've all had that thought. If I could have it my way. There is a movement like that. The second part is sung only by the men because it takes place in the tavern, in taberna, opening with the baritone singing, burning inside. Then one of the most famous arias, actually sung by the tenor, he only has one aria. The Swan. Back then when they used to eat swans. Nowadays, of course, that's not common, but back then, that was a delicacy. And this is actually the story of about to be roasted, told from the swan's point of view. You know, and this poor swan very clearly says that he looks at the fire and he's starting to turn black, and he sees this teeth of the people who are about to eat him, and it's pretty scary. It's funny as well, but there is this very dark humor associated with it, plus the fact that we have a tenor literally singing at the highest range of his voice, which adds, I think, a lot of drama to the story. Then we have an abbot, back to the baritone, an abbot who's had a little too much to drink, and I'm going to give you a heads up, he's going to act it out. And we've seen this. He gets up, he cannot help himself, you know, I love you, man. We've seen that. You've had that one guy who had a little too much to drink and they're hugging you, oh, I love you, man. He's going to be one of those. They had them back then in the 12th century. And he starts saying that I am the abbot, I am the cool guy, I am the smart guy. And the choir, the men start yelling at him, sit down, shut up, you know, okay, enough, you're embarrassing us. Right before the end of the tavern, all of the men start drinking and they start toasting. They start toasting to the king. And they start toasting to the counts and to their friends. And by the end of the movement, they start toasting to the Pope, which back then could have ended, could have killed, could have had you killed. There is a couple of moments where they start toasting to people in the Vatican. It's quite remarkable. And again, all of these things have to be done very quietly. The last section, the court of love. This is where the children come in. Cupid is in the air. And here's the soprano also comes in. And she starts talking about this innocent, beautiful, dreamy. You're going to have a lot of moments in this last section, because it's the children and it's the soprano, very innocent love. Eventually the love starts becoming a little dirtier. At one moment the men start saying, well, if the man and the girl go behind the bushes and filling the blanks, you know, and then back to the girl talking about love again and dreaming and finding my Prince Charming. What is not to relate to that? I mean, again, the subject matter, to me, is what's always been amazing, how things, how little things change in the universe. The simple things that make us human. The simple stories of love and caring and friendship and parties. You know, it's remarkable. And that, I think, is the reason why Carmina Burana is as popular as it is. Because it speaks to you. There's going to be at least, I promise you, 5 or 6 movements that you've lived this in your own lives. You've experienced this. And you're going to see somebody else act it out. That is why this music is so poignant. That is why this music stays around. Carmina, I got to tell you, for a conductor, is a riot. This is one of the pieces that, for me, I have to do a lot, at least once every year. Because it's good for the soul. And also, it's a lot of fun to conduct. One of my colleagues, conductors, told me one time that it's almost like he feels dirty when he conducts his because it's so popular that he should focus on some of the more serious stuff. But he said, but you know what? Conducting Carmina Burana, he said, it's like being in Paris or in Rome or in London and craving a Big Mac. Thank you so much for joining us, my friends. Enjoy the concert.